When Priya's husband died in a violent mugging, the grief she felt was wrapped in layers of fear and disbelief. It wasn't just the pain of losing him, it was the horror of how it happened. She couldn't close her eyes without picturing the moment he was taken from her. She became hypervigilant, afraid to leave her home, plagued by guilt that she had encouraged him to take a late-night walk. Her mourning wasn't just for him, but for her sense of safety, trust, and the world she once believed in. What she experienced was more than grief. It was traumatic grief. Welcome to this mini-series on understanding the language of grief, loss, and trauma. My name is Nathalie Himmelrich. I'm a somatic practitioner, psychological therapist, educator, and author, specializing in grief and trauma, and the host of the How to Deal with Grief and Trauma podcast. Grief and trauma are deeply human experiences, yet many of us struggle to describe what we are going through or to understand what others are facing. The vocabulary of loss is vast, varied, and sometimes overwhelming. In this short podcast episode series, we'll explore the different types of grief, loss, and trauma that people encounter throughout life. Each mini-episode serves both as an educational tool and a compassionate companion for anyone trying to make sense of their own experience with grief, loss, and trauma, or someone who is supporting someone else who is. These terms are more than labels. They are doorways into greater understanding, healing, and connection. Whether you are a bereaved parent, a caregiver, a therapist, or someone walking alongside a grieving friend or someone who has experienced trauma, these bite-sized episodes aim to give you language, insight, and tools. Each one includes a definition, some key considerations, an explanation of why it matters, relevant podcast episodes, and frequently asked questions that I have been asked by my clients and you, the listener of the podcast. And my answers are all grounded in both professional and lived experience. So let's begin. Grief reaction complicated by trauma, often due to a violent or distressing circumstance of death. This kind of grief arises when death itself is not only emotionally painful but also psychologically wounding, triggering a trauma response in the bereaved. Symptoms of traumatic grief may mirror those of post-traumatic stress disorder, including flashbacks, nightmares, panic attacks, avoidance behaviors, and an ongoing sense of danger. The mind struggles to integrate the sudden and often graphic reality of the death, leaving the person feeling stuck between mourning and surviving. People experiencing traumatic grief might find it hard to talk about the loss, or they may feel a deep need to repeatedly tell the story in search of meaning or understanding. Relationships can become strained as others may not fully grasp the sensitivity and intensity or persistence of the trauma that overlays the grief. So without acknowledging and treating the trauma component of this type of grief, healing is often stalled. So traditional grief support might not be enough. The nervous system is overwhelmed and safety must be reestablished before mourning can truly unfold. So understanding traumatic grief helps friends, families, and professionals respond with compassion and avoid re-traumatizing the bereaved by minimizing their experience and urging them to move on. It's pivotal to not just be in work with someone who is grief literate, but also trauma-informed. So trauma-informed grief work offers a pathway for survivors to process both the emotional and the somatic imprint of the loss. Given the name and the nature of this podcast, How to Deal with Grief and Trauma, there is many episodes covering grief and trauma. There's, for example, the episode with Turi Hanover in episode 4, where we explore the intersection of grief and trauma. Also, James Fishgill in episode 51 discusses relational and body-centered approaches to processing complex loss. Mitten in episode 18 speaks about life's traumas, and I review trauma modalities with grief and trauma colleague Megan Riordan-Jarvis in episode 49. Personally, I delve into the combination of grief and trauma in the context of resilience many times, but specifically in episode 86. Please check the episode overviews for more information. So a couple of the questions I've received. First of all, the number one question in this regard is, how is this different from regular grief? So first of all, the kind of loss that you've experienced doesn't mean that you have to experience trauma. Trauma is an experience where a person experienced a loss and has been left alone or has not been supported well. So trauma grief or traumatic grief includes symptoms of trauma, such as intrusive thoughts, fear for personal safety, emotional numbing, alongside the sorrow and longing of grief. The loss feels not only heartbreaking but shattering. And as mentioned before, it has to do with the sense of safety of the loss. Can trauma therapy help? Yes. Evidence-based therapies like EMDR, which is called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, then somatic experiencing, and integrative grief therapy can be instrumental in releasing traumatic memory and restoring a sense of inner safety. I really recommend episode 49. So why do I feel stuck? I often hear. Trauma, it can freeze the nervous system, which is making it hard to move through the natural stages of grief, without saying that there's fixed stages of grief. But what feels like this stuckness is often the body processing itself or protecting itself until the sense of safety is reestablished. So it is very important, as I said before, to have someone that is not just grief literate but trauma informed. Another question I received is it normal to relive the moment of loss over and over? Not just in traumatic grief, but specifically there, it is normal that intrusive memories, because they are the hallmark of traumatic grief. These can be addressed and soothed through trauma-informed practices that gently reprocess the memory without re-exposing you to harm. So I have to be clear that trauma-informed care is not about re-traumatizing and you having to relive those excruciating memories again and again. In the next episode, we are going to be covering disenfranchised grief. So stay tuned. I hope this episode has helped you feel more grounded in the language of loss, grief, or trauma, and maybe even offered you some clarity, validation, or insight into your own experience or the experience of someone you care about. Grief and trauma are deeply personal, yet universal. When we can name what we're feeling, we take one powerful step closer to healing and the integration of our experience back into our life. If this series resonates with you, I invite you to keep exploring. You'll find more resources, courses, and ways to work with me at nathaliehimmelrich.com. And of course, you're always welcome to revisit any of the episodes whenever you need a gentle reminder that you're not alone. Until next time, take good care of your heart.